hello and welcome. We are discussing the Indian path to global growth, the challenges and opportunities for Indian companies in their international expansion. So before I begin the questions to the panelists, Sanjay, if you can take us through a snapshot of the Accenture report.
All right. So I guess this is a piece of research which we did really to investigate what are some of the companies who are masters at globalization really doing differently. And there's a reason why we did this research. If you just look at the last decade, the investments in internationalization through mergers and acquisitions has grown about 4 times for Indian companies. It's gone from about $10 billion a year to about $40 billion. So Indian companies have invested about $350 billion over the course of the last decade. Now, if you go and ask them, are you happy with your internationalization? Only 1/3 say they are. And what do they mean? Are they happy with globalization? Are they getting the return on investment, the profits? So why is that the case? And as we studied these masters of globalization, I think there are essentially 4 things that emanate. The first is these companies are very clear about why they are internationalizing. So is it de-risking the business? Is it searching for other growth avenues? Is it to build a global brand? So what's the reason? The second is they're very, very clear about how they're going to differentiate themselves. So some very interesting examples of companies who are differentiating by going into other markets to get the best practices back to the home market. The third key thing is, what are the platforms for this internationalization? So how do you do it? I mean, what capabilities do you build? What processes do you build? How do you leverage information technology for your globalization? And finally, not surprisingly, of course, leadership, talent, culture integration. How do you govern the business overseas? What is the leadership development mechanism? So in a snapshot, that's really what the research is about.
Okay, so I'll take from the key finding of the report that 64% of the respondents feel that they are not satisfied with the revenue and profit growth. And they also feel because they do not know why they are really going global. What is the key strategic growth driver that is accelerating the international expansion of Indian companies? Vivek?
We have a very focused and disciplined expansion strategy which we call 3x3, which is presence in emerging markets of Asia, Latin America and Africa in our 3 core categories: personal wash, home insecticides and hair colors. So we've actually defined the investment thesis quite clearly. And our rationale for going international is that while we see tremendous growth opportunities in India, a lot of these emerging markets are also seeing very similar consumer and income trends similar to that of India. So we fundamentally believe that we can effectively leverage what we do very well in India, which is providing superior quality products at affordable prices to these markets as well. Our approach has been largely acquisitions-led. In the past, we've of course exported a lot, but over the last 3 years, we've made acquisitions in Indonesia, in Africa, in Chile, in Argentina. And about 3 years ago, about 15% of our revenues were coming from outside India. That number is close to about 50%. And so in that sense, it's been a fairly aggressive transformation of the entire business.
So, K. Venkatraman, a lot of times people have stared on the low-cost advantage. You know, they've said that low-cost advantage is what is going to give them that competitive edge. Do you think that still stands, or do you think that we need to move further from there?
Depends on the type of product and the brand that you already have. For Larsen & Toubro, we have a high-quality brand, very reliable, and obviously when we enter the product business, you have to have having manufacturing in India. Let's take the product side, manufacturing in India, valve or manufacturing process plant equipment where there is certain cost advantage to manufacturing here. You will definitely have certain advantage in cost leadership, but you don't have initially the scale which some of the international companies have. So we have positioned ourselves as a high quality product at a competitive basis, because finally in this type of business you have to be having if you're going to enter and there are already major players from Japan or from the best countries available, you got to have the same quality, same safety standards. And obviously, initially, you have to be a little more competitive than they are, which inherently we have some advantages.
Okay, so now I'll take another point that the report makes that, Indian companies are not confident of charting a global path on 3 counts. They do not have the operational capabilities, then they do not have the, they do not have the processes in place for an effective operation in multiple geographic locations, and then the IT infrastructure. Now, Kanwar Sharma, Lupin is in Africa, in Japan, UK, all around the world. How did you manage all these? How did you manage your operations, your processes?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, you have to build those capabilities that you don't have. If you decide, you have to be first clear about the objective that you want to pursue. And as I said a while ago, that getting international in your business character is something that you cannot avoid. And if that be so, then you will have to build those capabilities. And then, of course, any objective or any goal that you set for yourself has time attached to it. So you will have to then select capabilities which you need to build organically, and some you need to acquire through inorganic means. And accordingly, you make a kind of meaningful balance.
Okay, so Mr. Chandak, your KEC is like in 30 countries, really spread all across. So how did you get into these countries and manage all your operations and processes?
I think the most important is that you have to invest in IT. I think there is no choice other than putting in money in IT. Also, you have to continuously improve your process and systems, and you take outside help. We work with Accenture. You have to really improve and always update. So you cannot say that you have arrived at one place. You have to continuously work on that. So I think the both are very critical.
So Sanjay, how would you say a company should build a global operating model to succeed internationally?
So Veena, I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all. So as you'll talk to Ramesh, he'll tell you that they'll leave a lot of flexibility with each of the companies. And in fact, they don't send anybody from India to the overseas operations. I think it's very, very company specific. You've got to find that right balance for yourself of being local and being global. So I guess that's the best way to put it across.
To your point, I think one thing that I have seen repeatedly succeeding is to use a lot more of local talent.
Yeah.
There's no, there should not be a hurry to impose, your people at the leadership level, because I find that there's a lot of equity and a lot of experience that especially when you're acquiring, and I think even in an organic build-up, if you recruit people who are locally, capable, understand the business and the system, there's a lot easier passage to success than to take people from here, put them up there, get them acclimatized to the local conditions.
Okay, Vivek, another point that I want to bring from the report is that, 62% of the companies, the daunting challenge for them is to understand the international market, to understand their customer preferences. So how did really Godrej go about in the international space, go about understanding, companies, and what advice would you give companies who are foraying internationally and who have this challenge in mind?
The approach that we use is what we call value-based partnering, and we give a lot of operational autonomy to the companies that we've acquired. And ultimately, the people on the ground are the ones who are the most knowledgeable as far as local preferences are concerned, how their consumer needs are evolving. And what you have to do is essentially create a true partnering approach, which is based on a certain common values system. So we actually are at that stage where we are encouraging cross-pollination. We are trying to rotate some people. While we retain most of the management team, we actually feel like, values and culture don't exist on PowerPoint slides. These are lived by people who are part of the operations. And so if you want to forge common values, we have to encourage rotations. We are now thinking that for all our employees who are high potential employees, over the next 3 years, they will all be required to do either an international stint or an international project. But we are at that stage where we feel quite strongly that the best ideas and the best cross-pollination happens through sharing and learning. So creating the right forums, creating the right kinds of councils for people to meet, share and learn and discover from each other, I think is extremely, extremely important.
Dr. Gambhir Sharma, like, you know, if you take, like, there's a global survey that was just came out last week which said that it was only the Tata brand that had increased its brand recall in 2013. But still you would say Tatas don't have a really brand recall like the Hyundai. So why do we really suffer from this weak perception of our brand, and what can be done?
You know, top of the mind reason is that the Indian companies are in their kindergarten as far as globalization is concerned. Because the whole journey actually began in 2004, 2005, because in 91 the economy really opened up. It took us a little while to, really get used to the idea of being, competed with international competitors and to build our own capabilities. And we know for sure that post-91 many companies went down and under because they just couldn't cope with that trade barriers and no duties on the border regime. Therefore, it was kind of a metamorphosis of a kind for the industry. So the entire effort to internationalize has really begun in somewhere in the last decade, if I may say. So it's too early, and I think the other companies, Tata of course is the biggest house out of India, so they have done acquisitions like JLR and the Chorus Steel, and these are big ticket acquisitions. So you were known not only because of heritage, the size, and the kind of action that you've done. Which company has done that kind of acquisition and that kind of heritage they carry? So I think it's still time.
Just to add a little more to this, China, we keep saying, has been a powerhouse manufacturing, and it's mostly taken over as a country. I don't see too many Chinese brands even now who can compete and be called. The other thing which I wanted to add was really, there's something also called brand India needs to be also promoted. It's the companies who are producing in India and supplying, or Indian by origin. That brand has to be also India brand, to be added on to what each one is trying to do. I've seen this in Japan, I've seen this in the Korean, I've seen the Chinese do that. And they there's some infrastructure supporting the whole thing of individuals also pushing their name and brand. Then that'll accelerate and, it'll be faster, I think.
Sanjay, today, what would you say are the key, drivers for competitive advantage for Indian companies in the overseas markets?
So I think we talked a bit about it earlier. I think clearly there is the value platform. I think there is a need to recognize which markets your existing products could make a difference. So if you're manufacturing something in India which will work in Indonesia, let's take Bajaj motorcycles as an example, in Southeast Asia, in Philippines, Thailand, Vietnam, Indonesia, the brand will work, that product will work. That's a great place to go and target your product. More importantly, once you go to those markets, and I think maybe Vivek and Wayne in terms of their experience of bringing some ideas from other markets into India. So if you take Fortis Healthcare, that's exactly what they've done. As they've globalized within the region, they've brought examples of good processes back into India, into the hospitals. So I think it's about very clearly understanding what's your platform you want to take globally. And then once you've taken it there, learn from that and then bring it back in here. So the cross-pollination also works both ways.